Hey, Meredith, this is Jimmy Hart. I'm pretty sure we've got you set up on the tech stuff now, streaming, and you're a co-host.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jimmy.
You are welcome.
Awesome. So I think, Elizabeth, like, why don't we go ahead and get started? If you wanted to kind of like reverse back to the thought that you were in the middle of when we had to switch over, that would be a good place to start. So anybody else who joins kind of doesn't miss as much.
Sure, absolutely. I will try to remember where I left off, but I think we were talking about the alignment tool and how to make sure that your text is aligned whenever you're doing your lower third. So from here, you click this little wrench and you can open the show rulers, show guides. And what's really neat about this is you see this little blue line right here. I can make sure that my text and my lower third is completely aligned right here. So I do this by dragging across the screen. You can drag it wherever you want, and voila. And then you can just kind of line up your text nicely to fit. You can move it just by grabbing it right there. And let me get that off the screen. So that's kind of our first little animation, and it's pretty basic. One thing to notice also is that you see this background is pretty busy. Even though we were out of focus in this background, it's soft, but there's still a lot going on. So one thing to note is that in the Essential Graphics panel, here is where you can change your font, the weight, the size. We use Proxima Nova, all caps, because it's pretty clean and it's pretty easy. You don't have to worry so much about grammar formatting and all of that stuff. So I've actually added a drop shadow, and it's really neat because in here you can adjust the opacity of the drop shadow, the angle which the shadow is coming out of the text, the distance, and also the size as well as the blur. So here, subtle is better. You don't want to go too overboard with the drop shadow, but it just makes it pop a little bit more, and so it doesn't get lost in all of this that's going on in the background. Plus her title is pretty long, so I want to make sure that it goes well over this white that she's wearing right here. The next thing I want to talk about is pretty easy. It's a boxed lower third. You can see right here, it's a pretty simple entrance into the shot. This is the same text, Dr. Catherine O'Neill. We've got her description as well. So I've typed this on by using the type tool right here. You can go into the Essential Graphics panel, and if you check background, here we have our lovely LSU purple. I would definitely recommend being on brand with that. I'm sure you all already are. But you can adjust the opacity of the box as well as the spread of the box as it is away from the text. And then I just added a simple cross dissolve, which you can also achieve by clicking the actual text and then doing Command D, or I believe on Windows it's Control D. So I have her name coming in first, the weight heavier than the description, and then I have her description coming in second. Lower thirds are typically 1 or 2 lines below the name. You don't want to get it too busy. And lastly, this is a very subtle lower third. Notice that it's all in one text box right here. I have it actually aligned to the right. This is done because I think that it creates a really nice clean look because you have him kind of angled towards the left. So you have nice negative space in here, and that's a really great spot where you can put your lower third. I've aligned it to the right, and I've done so by doing the tool option, dragging my ruler across and creating a line right here. So I've done that within the Essential Graphics. I can highlight just this part of the text to create it extra bold. And then here is semi-bold, so the weight is a little bit different. I've achieved this opacity effect. Note that the cross dissolve effect is not on here, but another way, there's always 1,000 ways to do a lower third and a transition and an animation, but I adjusted the opacity keyframe. So here it's at 0, and then I changed it to 100% right there. So it has a nice little fade in. And I also added a drop shadow as well, just to make it pop a little bit more. But note that on the box lower third, I actually got rid of the drop shadow because I wanted a cleaner, sleeker look here. So this is kind of an overview of lower thirds. There's plenty of websites that can offer you free templates or anything like that for lower thirds, and we have included those in our resource sheet. But easier or simpler is better in the long run because we're just enhancing the video. We're not trying to distract from the video. So with that, are there any questions?
Yes, so there was a question about where to find the shutter angle.
Yes, sure. So let me go back, sorry. Let me go back to my animated lower thirds. So when you go under effects and you add let me spell transform right. Distort, transform, you add that effect to your text. And under here, so it'll pop up right here, you bring down all these different options right here. The shutter angle is kind of hidden right here. You can adjust it to 360 all the way down to 0. Notice when it's 0, you don't have that nice, smooth, kind of blurry look whenever it comes in. And then you can adjust that. You can do 360, which is going to be super blurry. So, woo, got that. I don't know if you can see it if the lag is too much, but we got some nice blur right there. So does that answer your question about the shutter angle? Awesome.
Excellent.
Well, if there are no more questions, I will hand it over to Grace, and she can get started.
Hey guys, so I'm going to share with you 2 of my favorite ways to make videos pop. The first one I'm going to share with you, I get really excited every time I have an option to do this. It's called parallaxing. So I'm going to share my Photoshop screen with you guys. So we're going to start in Photoshop for this effect. I love to do this. A lot of the times you may be handed a bunch of photos and asked to turn that into a video. So instead of maybe just throwing that into a slideshow look, you can actually turn those photos into a moving picture. That can be called parallax motion. So I love to do that. It adds a lot of depth to the pictures that you may get from researchers who don't have a video, or from research magazines that you want to highlight. And I'll give an example of that at the end. The first, I'm going to walk you through a really quick way to parallax. So let's start with our photo in Photoshop. You want to make sure you have a high quality photo that has less pixelation. So if you do not have a high quality photo, that's okay. You can go into your image and click on image size and update the pixels here and your resolution there. And I've already done that. So the next thing you want to do is double this layer. So you're going to click on the layer and drag it on down to here over the plus arrow. And so that way you've got 2 layers. This will allow us to cut out this bird. So there's a really fun way to do this. You go to select and then click on subject, and it just automatically selects that subject for you. It's pretty awesome. Now it does make some mistakes. As you can see, we have this little part right here that's not quite cut out correctly. So you'll go to your quick selection tool over here, and you use your option or alt key to toggle back and forth and to cut out the bird in the correct way. So that's great. That's helped out that way. So first, what we're going to do is right click on this bird and click on Content Aware Fill. Now, this is a new feature in Photoshop, newish feature, but I've been really enjoying it because it takes the background and it fills in that subject with the background. So it kind of creates an invisible bird here. So just pressed OK. We have our invisible bird layer and we have our background layer here. The next thing I want to do though is I'm going to hide that invisible bird layer. I'm going to click back on that normal layer, right click on the bird, and this time I want to cut out the bird. So I'm just going to press layer via copy. So this way we've got a nice little cutout of our subject. So let's go ahead and highlight our invisible subject and our background. I'm going to move them together, and I want to merge these 2 layers here. Okay, so we've got them merged. And so now we're playing with our 2 layers, our bird and our background. Now the background you can see has these lines and you're like, well, it's not really invisible yet. So we're going to fix that. We're going to our clone stamp tool. And the way clone stamp works is you choose part of the picture that you want to stamp onto this another part of your picture. So it's called the clone stamp tool. So I'm just gonna go quickly around here and just choose parts of my sky that I like, that I'm going to stamp over the outline of the bird. Just a quick tip, don't choose a part of the sky that's in the corner of the sky or far away from your subject, because there are these little tiny differences in hue and saturation that you can tell. I've learned that quite a few times. Also, another tip when you're parallaxing, if you haven't done this before, I would recommend choosing a picture that has a blurry background, because it makes filling in that background much easier. Okay, so here we go. We've got the bird, we've got the background, and now we're going to save this image as a Photoshop file. This is very important to save it as a Photoshop file, because it will save it as a layer, and we're going to import those layers into Premiere next. So I'm going to take us over into Premiere and import our Photoshop file here. Yes, we want to import it as individual layers. That will allow us to make that bird fly. Okay, so we've got our layers here. I'm going to drag it into the sequence. And because my sequence is already at 1920 by 1080, I'm going to need to resize the background here. And we don't want it to totally fit. We can just play around with it, because we know our background and the birds already has a pretty high pixel ratio. So we should be good. So I'm going to start the bird over on the left side of the corner, the left side of the picture, because I want it to go with the movement we already see in the picture. So I want the bird to fly this direction towards the right side of the screen. So in order to do that, I'm going to go into my effect controls panel, and in motion, put a keyframe under position at the beginning of my clip. Then I'm going to move my little playhead over here, and I'm going to slide the bird over. Now, the less is more when it comes to parallaxing, because otherwise it kind of looks unnatural, and you want it to look as subtle and natural as possible. So let's see what that looks like. Well, it looks pretty good, but we can take it up a notch and move the background layer in the opposite direction. So do the same thing, go to Effect Controls, put down our little keyframe there. And now I want to move the background in the opposite direction of the bird. And one tip is you always want your subject to move faster than the background. That just makes it a little bit more natural. Great. So we've got a really good looking parallax, but you can take it a step further. You can nest these two layers. And now we're going to do something that I like to call the camera movement. So now I'm going to pretend like I've got the camera, and I'm going to follow this bird across the screen. So go back to Effect Controls, Position, Scale. I'm going to zoom in a little bit to give us a little bit of playing room, and follow this bird across the screen, and zoom in just a little bit. And that'll create even more depth with our parallaxing. So now we've got that bird flying. So one of the ways that I like to use parallaxing, or we like to use parallaxing, is to highlight research stories. A lot of the times researchers will have photos, but they don't have video. So this is a good way to highlight this. We had a research magazine go out recently, actually a while ago. And so we created some Instagram highlight stories and chose some photos from the research mag and highlighted those by parallaxing them and adding some text. So here's an example of some more parallaxing that I got to do. I was so excited to do it. And if you can see, I added a little bit of extra to these. If you look here, you can add some water, a water overlay to make it look like the water is moving. The boat's coming towards you. I added some blur to the background, and then you have your text up here. It really allows for the text to be the focus, but also makes for more than just a static image. Here we have blur in the background, and these ladies were cut out and are moving towards the camera. And then here we go, we have our bird again. So if you want to see more of this type of research story parallaxing, I did about 4 more, I believe, of those, and you can find them on LSU's Instagram page under the highlights, the research highlights. So do we have any questions, any thoughts? I've got about a minute that I can answer any.
I think we can keep on going.
Awesome. Okay, and also in our resource sheet, I think each of us included a YouTube link that goes into more detail on all these subjects, and that I've found YouTube links to be very helpful. So yeah, if you're like, whoa, I don't know how to do this just from this quick example, don't worry, you can look at that YouTube link later or email us and we can get back to you. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to be doing is making your colors pop. So I'm going to go ahead and close out this bird project, go on to our Lumetri color project here. Awesome, we'll say goodbye to the bird. Okay, so sometimes you may get photos or videos. Actually, we're just going to focus on videos today with this Lumetri color. Sometimes you may get videos that are kind of flat, and that's okay. That's the way they were filmed, but we really want to make them pop more, bring out certain colors. And I'm going to go ahead and add an adjustment layer. So you can click on New Item, Adjustment Layer, and drag it on in. And you may think, well, Grace, let's just bump up the saturation. Let's just bump up the exposure contrast. Let's just do some basic corrections. Okay, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to bump up the saturation, and it brings some of the green out. I'll bump up some of the contrast, but I'm still not getting that blue that I want from the sky. And I don't want to bump up the saturation too much because then it just looks way too yellow and crazy. So I'm just going to show you all how to pull out the color that you want. Now, in order to do that, it does help to start with a basic layer of high contrast, high saturation, not super high, but just medium high. That'll allow you to pull out the colors you want. So now we're going to layer our Lumetri colors on top of each other. So the new Lumetri color effect that you put in from your effects panel should go below your first Lumetri color. And then what you're going to do is go down to the HSL secondary panel underneath Lumetri color. And this is where the magic happens. So you choose this eyedropper here and you choose the part of your picture that you want to highlight and bring out those colors. So I want to bring out this part of the sky, but I also want to bring out this part of the sky too. So I'm going to click on this plus eyedropper and I can add this part of the blue to it as well. I'm going to click on this color gray, so just so that I can see what I'm actually working with, and move these bars around a little bit to make sure that I'm really focused on the sky and I'm not getting too much of these clouds, and I'm not highlighting any buildings because we don't want to turn the buildings blue. So the next thing you can do to really elevate this is to do your denoise just a tiny bit. It'll help fill in some of those areas up here, and then blur just a little bit. You don't want to blur too much, otherwise your colors will start to leak into each other. So let's take off that color gray and go on down here to our color wheel. And we're not going to play around with this. We're just going to move the temperature down to blue. So you can see here, we're already bringing out the blue in the sky. We don't want it to look like a Toy Story blue, right? So subtle is the best. And if you've gotten this blue here, but you want to make it darker, you can also play with contrast. Really quick, if you find that you are highlighting some of your buildings on accident, you can just throw on a mask and then it'll only affect the part that your mask is covering. So that's about all the time I have for this Lumetri color. I'm just going to pop on a finished example here. But do we have any questions? So you can see here, I just highlighted the trees, the roof, the sky, the lake. It's super fun. So I'd recommend giving it a shot. That's all I got.
Thanks, Grace. Any questions? Okay, I don't see any hands, no questions. Well, thank you guys so much for attending this session with us. We were so excited to be able to share some of these little tips and tricks with you. Don't forget that you can also go back to the main SECCA website to watch other on-demand webinars that were happening at the same time. Make sure to copy the link to our resource sheet so that you'll have all of the resources that we talked about today, as well as the contact information for Andrew, Elizabeth, and Grace. And with that, I will say farewell and thank you guys so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.